My name is Ethan, and at that time, I was just 15 years old. It was the first time my parents allowed me to stay home alone overnight. Something I had been looking forward to for a long time. We lived in a quiet suburb, our house tucked deep within an isolated neighborhood. I vividly remember it being a stormy night, with heavy rain, thunder, lightning, and the sound of wind whistling through the trees as if someone was stirring every leaf. A chilly atmosphere enveloped the entire house, but I found it oddly comforting. Stormy weather always gave me a sense of security when I was inside, and looking out the window at the raging storm only made me feel cozier. My parents had gone on a weekend getaway, and they repeatedly reminded me not to go outside or invite anyone over. But for me, that wasn't a problem at all. I thought I'd have an amazing night, doing whatever I wanted without anyone supervising or scolding me. I had planned out the whole evening, play games, blast music without fear of being reprimanded, and savor this rare freedom. Around 8 p.m., the rain began to pour harder, and the wind grew stronger with each passing moment. Sitting on the porch, watching the rain, I remember feeling incredibly relaxed. Waves of rain battered the roof, accompanied by flashes of lightning illuminating the pitch-black sky. Each time thunder boomed, its sound echoed throughout the quiet space of the house. But that only made me enjoy it more. To me, stormy nights like this always create a special feeling, a sense of isolation, but also a deep warmth, where you can just stay home and not worry about the outside world. After a while of watching the rain, I thought I should take advantage of this time to do what I loved most: play games. I decided to move the Xbox from my bedroom to the living room. Playing games on my dad's big screen TV, something I could only do when no one else was home, was an indescribable joy. I sank into the sofa, started up the game, and immersed myself in the virtual world where everything was under my control. The sound of gunfire and explosions in the game seemed to blend perfectly with the rain and thunder outside, creating an ideal atmosphere. My surroundings were quiet, with only the storm raging outside and the vivid sounds of the game filling the house. I thought I was in for a peaceful night, but I was wrong. As I was fully absorbed in the screen, a sudden doorbell rang, breaking the quiet I had just been enjoying. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't imagine who would be visiting at this hour, especially in the middle of a stormy night. I paused the game and sat still for a moment, trying to listen. The doorbell rang again, this time clearer. I didn't know why, but something in the air made me feel uneasy. The doorbell rang again, pulling me out of the virtual world of the game. I paused the game, my mind racing with questions about who could be showing up at this hour during a stormy night. My house was located in a fairly secluded area, and most neighbors weren't accustomed to wandering around late at night. On top of that, the heavy rain and howling wind made everything feel even more ominous. I climbed the stairs and approached the front door, the porch light casting a glow through the frosted glass. I stood still for a moment, trying to listen, but all I could hear was the sound of rain and the wind whistling. I felt a twinge of unease in my gut, but I mustered the courage to call out, "Is anyone there?" There was no immediate answer. I stood still, trying to keep calm. Then, after a few seconds of silence, I heard a raspy voice from outside calling in, "I need to borrow a phone." A wave of fear washed over me. I had no idea who this man was or why he needed to borrow a phone at this hour. My mind quickly ran through the warnings my parents had given before they left. Do not open the door for anyone, ... I quickly turned back to the living room, grabbed my phone, and called Cody, my best friend who had been gaming with me earlier. Cody answered right away, and I quickly recounted the story about the doorbell and the man outside. He immediately told me not to open the door. "Ethan, don't be stupid and open it. He could be dangerous," Cody said through the phone, his voice filled with concern. Despite his warning, the doorbell rang again, this time continuously, as if it wouldn't stop. I felt my heart racing, anxiety and fear beginning to envelop the quiet space of the house. The knocking felt like it was forcing me to act, but I didn't dare move. I decided not to respond again and sat silently in the living room, gazing toward the front door down the long hallway. I hoped that if I didn't react, the man would give up and leave. All I could do was pray that the doorbell would stop ringing and that everything would pass like a nightmare. During the stormy night, after a while, the doorbell stopped ringing, and I felt a sense of relief, thinking that perhaps the stranger had left. Outside, the storm continued to roar, and the sounds of falling rain mixed with thunder made me tell myself that everything was over. I sat back down, trying to return to the game to calm my nerves. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease creeping into my mind. Suddenly, another noise broke the silence, this time coming from the back of the house. My heart felt like it stopped beating. I turned my head to the right, and before me was a sight that paralyzed me with fear. The back door of the house was slowly closing, as if someone had just stepped inside. Before I could react, I saw the silhouette of a tall, imposing man quietly but menacingly entering the house. Panicking, I threw the game controller to the floor without thinking. The only thought that raced through my mind was to run. I dashed toward the nearby office, my heart pounding wildly as the footsteps of the man drew closer. It felt as if everything around me had grown more suffocating and terrifying than ever before. As I entered the office, I slammed the door shut and locked it immediately. My hands were trembling, and my whole body felt frozen in fear. Almost instantly, the doorknob rattled violently, and the sound of banging echoed throughout the room, as if the man outside was trying to break down the door. I could hear his furious shouts clearly. "Open the door, kid." His raspy voice grew louder, the sound becoming more menacing with each strike against the flimsy door that separated me from him. Cold sweat broke out on my forehead, and I couldn't stop shaking. The pounding on the door intensified, accompanied by angry curses. It felt as if I was trapped in a nightmare, unsure of what to do next. All I could do was pray that the door would hold, and that this horror would end soon. I had no other choice. With each loud bang on the door growing stronger, I knew I had to get out of there before the stranger broke through. In my panic, I remembered that the garage door was my only remaining escape route. My heart raced as my legs began to move instinctively. I knew I had to act fast. With trembling hands, I unlocked the office door, carefully cracked it open, and peeked out to ensure the stranger wasn't nearby. There were no signs of him, but I didn't dare take any chances. I dashed straight toward the door leading to the garage and pressed the button to open it. The garage door creaked loudly in the stillness of the rainy night, sounding like a warning bell that time was running out. The garage door opened slowly, and with each passing second, I worried that the noise would attract the intruder. I glanced quickly over my shoulder, feeling as though he could appear at any moment. The cold rain sliced through the air, but I didn't care. As soon as the door opened wide enough, I crouched and slipped outside, bolting into the darkness of the night rain. I felt as though someone was right behind me, but I didn't dare look back. Running through the heavy rain, I had only one goal in mind: the house of Mr. Martin, my family's friendly neighbor. I dashed toward it, each step filled with terror, feeling as though my life depended on every second. When I reached Mr. Martin's front door, I could no longer keep my composure. My hands shook as I pressed the doorbell, and I screamed for help above the sound of the pouring rain, hoping he would hear me. I stood there, drenched to the bone, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and my heart pounding like it might explode, waiting for a sign of salvation from within the house. When Mr. Martin opened the door, I felt as if I had escaped a nightmare. He saw me in a state of panic, soaked from the rain and trembling. Without hesitation, he pulled me inside, reassuring me with a pat on the shoulder and asking what had happened. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and recounted everything, from the doorbell ringing, the intruder breaking in, to my desperate escape in the rain. Without delay, Mr. Martin quickly called the police. While we waited, he kept me safe in the living room, making sure all the doors were securely locked. Each minute felt like an eternity, but the presence of Mr. Martin and his family gave me some comfort. Before long, the sound of police sirens echoed through the night, bringing with it a glimmer of hope. Officers swiftly surrounded my house and began to search the area. After a thorough search, they apprehended a man lurking in the shadows, wandering around the neighborhood. What terrified me even more was when the police said the man claimed this was his house and that I was his son. A chill ran down my spine upon hearing that. Even though the intruder had been arrested and taken away, the fear inside me didn't easily dissipate. After that horrifying night, I no longer felt safe being home alone. The image of the stranger stepping into my house haunted me, like a memory that would never fade. I never imagined that, in a million years, I would experience something so horrifying. Yet now, reflecting on it, I still can't believe it really happened. It was on a stormy night when I was 16, living in an old house with my mother and my 2 grandparents in the suburbs. That night, the storm began early. Lightning tore through the dark sky, the wind howled fiercely, whipping against the trees outside, making them sway violently and bang against the windows. The sound of rain fell steadily on the roof, but it wasn't the rain that unsettled MIT, was the constant whistling of the wind that made me feel like something was very wrong. I lay in bed, scrolling through Reddit posts, trying to push away the feeling of unease. I had always loved storms, but tonight felt different, as if a dark energy lurked within every gust of wind. Suddenly, pop. The entire house plunged into darkness. The power went out in an instant, and all I was left with was the faint glow of my phone. I wasn't too worried. My phone still had battery, and I was used to power outages during storms like this. But a chilling sensation began to creep over me. It wasn't the darkness that frightened me. It was the sudden silence, punctuated only by the wind outside. The house felt unnaturally quiet, unlike its usual ambience. I turned off my phone and tried to sleep, but something in my mind whispered that tonight would not just be an ordinary storm. The way the wind howled and battered against the windows felt like it was trying to drown everything out, making it impossible for me to sleep. I lay there, wide awake, listening to the sounds of the rainy night, waiting. But I didn't know what I was waiting for. Just as I was on the brink of drifting off, a strange sensation began to creep into my mind, preventing me from finding peace. The house was now hauntingly quiet, with only the wind's whistle echoing outside. Usually, such sounds would help me relax, but this time was different. Something felt off, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Then, I heard it, a very faint sound, nearly drowned out by the wind, but clear enough to my tense ears. It sounded like footsteps, soft yet distinct, seemingly coming from the hallway. My body stiffened, each heartbeat pounding in my chest. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind, but then the sound came again. This time, louder and closer, coming from the direction of the kitchen. My heart raced as I strained to listen. The quiet of the house became oppressive, and the atmosphere thickened with a sense of impending dread. I sat up in bed, holding my breath, waiting to see if I'd hear it again. The footsteps echoed in the back of my mind, growing more distinct, more deliberate. Each sound sent shivers down my spine. Was it just my imagination, or was someone or something really in my house? A vague fear began to swell within me. Could it be someone had entered the house? That thought sent chills coursing through my body. I reached for the flashlight resting on my nightstand, my hands trembling as I turned it on. The dim light from the flashlight wasn't enough to calm my nerves, but at least it illuminated the path ahead. I stepped out of bed, each footfall careful, as if the slightest sound could draw the attention of something. Tension filled the air around me. I stood still, listening intently, but the sound had faded away. The wind continued to howl outside, but inside the house, everything seemed wrapped in a terrifying silence. Should I check it out, or retreat back to my room and lock the door tight? A battle raged in my mind. The thought of staying hidden felt safe, yet the urge to confront whatever was lurking pushed me forward. After a few moments of deliberation, I took a deep breath and made my decision. I had to know what was going on. With my heart pounding, I slowly moved toward the doorway, the beam of the flashlight trembling as I approached the hallway. As I stepped out, the cold air enveloped me, amplifying my senses. I peered into the darkness, hoping to catch any movement or sign of life. My heart raced, and the silence felt deafening. Each creak of the floorboards beneath my feet sent jolts of adrenaline coursing through my veins. I had to be brave to face whatever lay ahead. But what if it was something far worse than I could imagine? When I was almost falling asleep, a strange feeling began to creep into my mind, making it hard for me to find peace. The house was now eerily silent, with only the howling wind echoing outside the window. Normally, the sound of the wind would help me relax, but this time it was different. Something felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Then, I heard it, a very faint sound, almost drowned out by the wind, but clear to my tense ears. It sounded like footsteps, very soft, seemingly coming from the hallway. My whole body froze, every heartbeat pounding in my chest. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind, but then the sound came again, this time clearer, closer from the direction of the kitchen. A vague sense of fear began to swell within me. Could it be someone had entered the house? The thought sent a chill down my spine. I reached for the flashlight next to my bed, my hands trembling as I turned it on. The weak light from the flashlight wasn't enough to put me at ease, but at least it helped me see the path ahead. I stepped out of bed, each footfall cautious, as if fearing that the slightest noise might draw the attention of something. The tension filled me. I stood still, listening, but the sound had stopped. The wind howled, but inside the house, everything seemed to be enveloped in a terrifying silence. Should I check, or should I go back to my room and lock the door tight? I gripped the flashlight tightly, taking cautious steps toward the kitchen, where just minutes before, I had secured the sliding door. A chilling sensation began to rise, spreading throughout my body as I approached and discovered that the sliding door was no longer closed. It was ajar, revealing a dark void outside, with cold gusts of wind continuously sweeping into the house. My heart felt like it stopped. How could this door be open? I was sure I had locked it. A rapid stream of thoughts flooded my mind. Had someone entered the house? Or had the strong wind forced it open? Even as I tried to find a reasonable explanation, fear continued to grow within me. I took a step back, not daring to approach the door to investigate. The entire house was now enveloped in a terrifying silence. The wind from outside grew stronger, its howling in my ears, warning me that something was not right. I stood there for a moment, debating whether to move forward and close the door. But each step felt heavy with the fear that if someone was inside the house, I would be trapping myself in an inescapable situation. Finally, I decided to return to my bedroom. My heart was still racing as I walked slowly, trying not to make a sound. Upon entering the room, I carefully checked the window to ensure it was securely locked. The light from the flashlight illuminated the rain and wind outside, but I saw no signs of any intruder. Yet, the feeling of being watched would not let me go. I lay back down on the bed, trying to calm myself with the thought that perhaps my grandfather had simply forgotten to lock the door. But even as I tried to convince myself it was just carelessness, the fear continued to haunt me. The sound of the wind and the rain kept pounding against the window. Every small noise made me jump. Unable to sleep, I lay there, wondering if someone truly was in the house, or if it was all just a fear I had conjured in my imagination. As I lay in bed, I tried every way to reassure myself that I was probably just imagining irrational fears. But the harder I tried to close my eyes, the larger my unease grew. In the quiet space, with only the howling wind outside, I suddenly heard a faint noise coming from beneath the bed. My heart seemed to stop, and my entire body tensed. I told myself that I must be imagining it, that it could be the wind or something brushing against the house. But then the noise came again, this time clearer, and it was right beneath my feet under the bed. I could no longer ignore it. A wave of sheer terror washed over me, but I knew I had to check. My hands trembled as I reached for the flashlight on the table, slowly bending down, taking a deep breath before shining the light under the bed. The beam of the flashlight flickered in the darkness, and at that moment, I saw the eyes. I felt like I had turned to stone. Under the bed lay a gaunt woman, her bloodshot eyes staring intensely at me without blinking. But what was most horrifying was not her eyes. It was the ghastly smile spreading across her pale face. Her lips curled back to reveal yellowed teeth, and then a shrill giggle erupted, reminiscent of a witch's laughter from my worst nightmares. I felt as if the blood in my veins had frozen. For a few seconds, I could only stand there, my heart racing wildly as I tried to process the horrific sight before me. But instinct kicked in, and I sprang up from the bed, not bothering to look back. I bolted out of the room, nearly slipping in my panic, and ran straight to my grandparents' room. My knocking on the door was frantic, and I yelled for my grandfather in terror, hoping he would wake up and rescue me from this nightmare. When my grandfather opened the door, I rushed into his arms, my voice trembling as I recounted everything that had just happened. He was much calmer than I had expected, and what surprised me the most was when he pulled out a gun from under the bed, a gun I never knew he had. His demeanor was resolute, but to me it only emphasized the gravity of the situation. We quickly made our way to my bedroom, and I stayed close behind him. Upon entering the room, I let out a sigh of relief mixed with fear. The woman under the bed had vanished. No more bloodshot eyes or ghastly smile. However, beneath the bed, we discovered several damp streaks on the floor, as if something had crawled out from under the bed and disappeared into the night. The window in my room was wide open, and the cold wind from outside blew in, making the curtain flutter. My grandfather gestured for me to stay still as he approached the window to check. He peered out into the thick darkness, where the wind continued to howl through the branches, but there was no sign of anyone. The woman, whoever or whatever she was, had completely vanished, dissolving into the night like a ghost. We couldn't determine who she was, where she had come from, or how she had entered the house. After checking the entire house and the surrounding area, my grandfather concluded that she had left and hadn't left any clear traces behind. I was still trembling, even though he tried to reassure me. He decided not to call the police, as there was no concrete evidence of an intruder. The police wouldn't be able to do much with only a few damp spots and a haunting story. The next day, my grandfather installed a new locking system and added extra security measures to the house. This made me feel a bit safer, but my fear of that woman didn't lessen at all. That night, I couldn't sleep in my own room, and for the following days, I meticulously checked every nook and cranny, especially under the bed, each night. The image of the gaunt woman with the bloodshot eyes and that haunting smile continued to replay in my mind. Even though she never returned, the dread that one day that terrifying smile might reappear beneath my bed lingered. Every time I tried to sleep, I couldn't shake the horror of that night when a nightmare truly infiltrated my world. I'm Adam, and that night, my girlfriend Linda and I decided to spend the weekend at the family's cottage in the suburbs, nestled deep in the woods. It was far from the hustle and bustle of the city. Normally, I loved the peaceful atmosphere here, but everything felt different that night. The sky had been signaling a major storm from early on, and by evening, the rain began to pour heavily. I had never heard thunder rumble like that before. The wind howled through the trees outside, as if it wanted to tear the entire forest apart. The small cottage, though old, was sturdy enough. Each gust of wind slammed against the walls and roof, causing everything to tremble. Usually, I didn't worry much about the rain and wind, but that night, the sounds made me feel uneasy. Linda, on the other hand, thrived on the feeling of safety when sitting indoors during a major storm. For her, it made the space feel cozy and special. We decided to watch a movie on the sofa, sipping on hot tea while outside. The rain showed no signs of letting up. I couldn't deny that this cozy atmosphere was somewhat relaxing, but deep down, I felt a sense of foreboding. Perhaps it was the storm growing stronger, or maybe it was the fierce howling of the wind that kept me on edge. As we were getting engrossed in the movie, suddenly a strange sound erupted from the porch. It didn't resemble the wind or the thunder. At first, I thought it might just be a branch hitting the roof, but the noise came again this time, clearer and closer. Linda turned to me, her eyes wide with concern. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice dropping as if afraid to break the stillness of the moment. I nodded, but tried to reassure her. "It's probably just the wind," I whispered, though my heart was anything but calm. I stood up and walked to the nearby window. Pulling back the curtain, I tried to peer through the heavy rain, but I couldn't see anything beyond the droplets hitting the glass. Still, the unsettling feeling inside me wouldn't go away. There was definitely something odd. I returned to the sofa, but I couldn't focus on the movie anymore. Linda was trying her best to stay calm, but I knew she could sense that something was off too. The storm outside wasn't the only thing that had us on edge that night. Linda tried to focus on the movie, despite the strange sounds outside, but I couldn't sit still. There was something nagging at me, an indistinct feeling that was deeply unsettling. I stood up and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain to peer through the rain. The porch light cast eerie shadows across the wet ground, creating shifting silhouettes among the trees. Despite the heavy downpour, I caught a fleeting glimpse of a figure darting through the darkness between the flashes of lightning and the rumble of thunder. "Do you hear that?" Linda asked, her voice tinged with fear. I didn't respond immediately, just nodded. In that moment, we both stood in silence, listening intently. The rain continued to pour. Thunder rolled from afar. But there was something different, a faint sound, like footsteps or something moving near the house. A chill ran down my spine. But I tried to reassure both myself and Linda. "It's probably just a lost animal," I said, attempting to keep my tone casual. Yet, I didn't truly believe it. The figure I had glimpsed didn't resemble any animal. It was too large, too silent to be just a creature. I turned back to the front door and checked the lock. I twisted it carefully, securing it before heading to the back of the house to inspect the rear door. Everything seemed fine, but the unease still lingered. Linda watched me from the sofa, her eyes filled with worry, but she was doing her best to remain calm. "Do you think we should be worried about this?" she asked, her voice trembling. I moved closer and sat down beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's okay. We've locked the doors, and it's probably just an animal." "Storms bring all sorts of surprises," I said, trying to sound confident. But even as I spoke, I couldn't shake the anxiety clinging to my chest. Something felt off, and I sensed we had just stepped into a nightmare that we hadn't fully acknowledged. The strange events outside were far from over. Linda shivered as I spoke about the mysterious figure lurking outside. "What are we going to do now?" she asked softly, her voice laced with fear. The atmosphere was thick with terror, and I knew we couldn't stay in this house any longer. I quickly brainstormed, searching for the only escape route left. The front and back doors weren't safe, but our car parked nearby could be our only hope for getting out of here. I looked at Linda, forcing my voice to remain steady, even though panic was swirling inside me. "Linda, we need to run to the car right now. I'll go first, and you follow close behind. We have to be quick before that guy can do anything," I whispered, more as a warning than a comfort. She nodded, her eyes wide with fear, and together we prepared to make our move. Linda nodded, trying to regain her composure. We hurriedly put on our raincoats, steeling ourselves to face whatever awaited us outside. I stood at the back door, taking a deep breath and mentally counting down. The darkness and the raging storm were relentless, but we had no other choice. I flung the door open, and the rain poured down, soaking my face instantly while the wind howled fiercely, threatening to sweep everything away. I held Linda's hand tightly for a moment, then gestured for her to wait. With a rush of adrenaline, I dashed ahead, sprinting toward the car parked not far from the house. The rain fell heavily, splashing around my feet as I ran, and the sound of the wind blended with the rumble of thunder, creating an atmosphere of chaos and urgency. Each step felt heavy, as if the storm itself was trying to drag me back. I glanced over my shoulder to check on Linda. She was right behind me, her face pale but determined. I reached the car, fumbling with the keys in my pocket, my heart racing with every second. I could almost feel the presence of that mysterious figure lurking nearby, watching us as we tried to escape. I finally found the key and unlocked the door, the light from the interior flickering to life. "Get in, quick," I shouted, my voice barely audible over the storm. Linda slid into the passenger seat, and I jumped in, slamming the door shut behind me. The sound of rain pounding on the roof was deafening, but I felt a fleeting sense of safety as we were enclosed in the car. However, that sense of safety was short-lived. The storm might have raged outside, but the real storm was just beginning to unfold. But when Adam was just a few steps away from the car, he suddenly stopped, his whole body stiff. In the dim light from the headlights, he saw a figure standing silently next to the car. It was the man they had seen before, with a vacant face and empty eyes, not moving at all. He just stood there, as if waiting for Adam to come closer. A wave of horror washed over Adam. He stared at the stranger, unsure of what to do next. The wind howled fiercely, and the rain seemed to fall even harder. But all Adam could hear was the pounding of his heart in his chest. The figure remained standing there, motionless, as if unaffected by the storm around him. Adam turned back and yelled at Linda, but she hadn't had the chance to step out yet. He knew that time was running out, and they had to act immediately before the situation worsened. My heart raced in my chest, the pouring rain and thunder unable to mask the rising tension. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. But the man just stood there, motionless, his gaze cold and vacant. I felt as if he were looking right through me, offering no response, merely standing there like a ghost in the storm. What terrified me even more was when another figure appeared from the other side of the house. It wasn't just one stranger, but two. Linda moved closer to me, her hand gripping my arm tightly, her whole body trembling from fear and cold. The rain continued to pour, each icy drop piercing into my skin. We stood frozen, unable to take our eyes off the two mysterious figures silently standing in the downpour. "What do we do now?" Linda whispered, her voice soft, almost choked in her throat. I had no answer. Panic surged within me, but I knew I couldn't let Linda see me lose control. For a brief moment, I looked around, searching for anything that could protect us. A damp piece of wood lay nearby, not the ideal weapon, but it was all I had. I picked up the piece of wood, holding it out in front of me, as if it were the last barrier between us and the two strangers. "Step back," I shouted, but there was no response. They stood there, motionless, simply staring at us in silence. A flash of lightning illuminated the sky, and in that moment, I clearly saw the strange way they stood like living statues in the storm. In front of me, both figures were frozen in time, showing no signs of life, yet no signs that they would leave. Everything felt surreal, as if we were trapped in a nightmare with no way to wake up. In a state of utter panic, Adam knew there was no time to think. The strange figures stood still, as if waiting for something. His heart raced, and he shouted to Linda, "Get in the car now." His voice echoed amidst the torrential rain and thunder, but Linda could hear the fear in every word. Without hesitation, she dashed into the passenger seat as Adam quickly opened the car door. The heavy rain made starting the car even more difficult. In a state of utter panic, Adam knew there was no time to think. The strange figures stood still, as if waiting for something. His heart raced, and he shouted to Linda, "Get in the car now." His voice echoed amidst the torrential rain and thunder, but Linda could hear the fear in every word. Without hesitation, she dashed into the passenger seat as Adam quickly opened the car door. The heavy rain made starting the car even more difficult. Both he and Linda remained silent throughout the drive out of the forest. The tension and anxiety filled the car, with only the sound of howling wind and the rain pounding against the windshield, mixed with the rumble of the engine. Adam knew they had escaped something truly terrifying, but he couldn't explain what had happened. As the dim lights of the town appeared ahead, Adam finally dared to exhale. A temporary sense of relief washed over him as he and Linda drew closer to the safety of the town. But the fear still lingered, deeply etched in their minds. Neither of them dared to look back, fearing that those shadowy figures might still be watching. They stopped the car in front of a small diner on the edge of town, where the warm lights and gentle hustle and bustle of life felt distant after what they had just experienced. Adam and Linda sat quietly in the car for a moment, not saying a word to each other. They could only feel their heartbeats gradually slowing. but the haunting memories of the terrifying night still enveloped them. Finally, Adam turned to look at Linda, his eyes filled with concern. "We're safe now," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. Linda merely nodded, her eyes still shimmering with fear. They didn't know what they had escaped from, but both were certain of one thing: the mysterious shadows and that stormy night would haunt them forever. The storm had passed, but what they experienced that night would never fade. That night, the storm arrived faster than I could have imagined. The rain poured down like a deluge from the pitch-black sky, and the wind howled through the dense trees surrounding my home. The thunder roared as if it wanted to shake the world itself, making my small house tremble with each flash of lightning outside the window. My name is Alex, and I live alone in a tiny house nestled deep in the forest, far away from the city and nearly devoid of nearby neighbors. This place is usually peaceful and quiet, but on stormy nights like this, the stillness morphs into something haunting and eerie. The weather forecast had warned of this major storm, but its ferocity left me feeling more unsettled than ever. I sat on the sofa, trying to drown out the howling winds outside by watching a horror movie. It had become my habit on rainy nights, sipping a hot cup of tea and immersing myself in the terrifying tales that flickered across the screen. However, tonight felt unusually different. The storm was too intense. The wind threatened to tear at the door, and each clap of thunder made the atmosphere inside the house feel heavier than ever. The dim desk lamp was the only source of light in the living room, casting eerie shadows on the walls that made the space feel even colder and more frightening. I could sense my isolation amid the raging storm outside, a loneliness I had never felt so acutely before. Every small noise grew louder and more threatening in the stillness of the room. As I was lost in the movie, a sudden sound jolted me upright. It was the doorbell. For a few seconds, I froze, completely bewildered by what had just happened. Who would come at this hour? No one would visit my home unannounced in the middle of a storm like this. My heart began to race, and my breath quickened. I glanced toward the front door, a flurry of thoughts racing through my mind. Could someone be lost? Or were they seeking shelter from the storm? But at this time, in such heavy rain, the doorbell rang again, this time louder and more insistent, as if the person outside was in a hurry. I set my cup of tea down on the table and stood up slowly. Each step felt heavy, and there was a strange sense that whoever or whatever was outside would not bring anything good. I moved closer to the door, the lamp behind me casting long shadows on the walls. The wind howled outside, making the door tremble. I stood before the heavy wooden door, anxiety swelling within me. Outside, the rain poured down relentlessly, the wind screeched in long gusts, but all of it was drowned out by the oppressive silence of what was happening inside the house. I hesitated. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, but then pulled back. Should I really open the door to a stranger in the middle of a storm like this? I took cautious steps toward the front door, the chill from the surrounding space seeping deep into my skin. The doorbell rang for the third time, frantic and tense, as if the person outside was desperate to get in. My hand trembled as I grasped the doorknob. I took a deep breath and pulled the door open. Cold wind rushed in, bringing with it heavy raindrops that splattered against my face, nearly making me step back. Outside, the rain poured relentlessly, and the wind howled through the branches, creating eerie sounds. Standing at the door was a man, his head covered by a hood that obscured most of his face. His long black coat was soaked through, clinging to him. Yet, I could still see his eyes shimmering with a dim light from the porch. looking cold and lifeless in a way that was terrifying. His voice echoed, low and hoarse, almost choked by the damp air. "I'm sorry, I'm lost, and my phone has no signal. Can I come in to escape the rain for a bit and use your phone?" I stood there, hesitating for a moment. The feeling of unease still enveloped me, but I couldn't leave someone outside in such a storm. The rain was slapping against my face, clouding my mind. The man remained still, not moving, as if waiting for my answer in silence. Every instinct warned me not to let a stranger into my home at this moment. But the sight of him standing there amidst the torrential downpour made it hard for me to refuse. "All right, come in," I said, my voice sounding forced. I stepped back, gesturing for him to enter. The man walked in without a word, his gaze fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. He stood there in the warmth of my living room, but his cold demeanor seemed to lower the temperature of the space by several degrees. I closed the door behind him, locking it carefully, my mind racing with the nagging thought that I might have just made a terrible mistake. The man stepped into the house, leaving wet footprints on the wooden floor. I handed him the phone, but instead of making a call, he simply stood there, looking at me with a gaze that made my heart race. The dim light from the table lamp illuminated his face, highlighting his cold, emotionless eyes. "Do you live alone?" His question rang out, his voice deep and heavy, like thunder rolling in the distance. The probing nature of his question sent a shiver down my spine. Why was he asking that? Every instinct in me flared up, but I tried to remain calm, not revealing my unease in my voice. "Yes, I live alone." "Is there a problem?" I asked, my mind racing with curiosity about his true intentions. The man smirked, but the smile didn't convey warmth. Instead, it was cryptic and chilling. He said nothing further, slowly walking toward the window, staring out at the torrential rain pounding against the glass. The howling wind outside sounded like a mournful wail in the pitch-black night. "The weather is really terrible, isn't it? Tonight, it's hard to know what might happen," he said, his eyes still fixed on the dark night outside, his voice thickening the air in the room. His words sent chills down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was indirectly trying to threaten me. In that moment, every instinct in me screamed that I needed to take action. I took a step back, trying to keep him from noticing the fear that was spreading throughout my body. My hands trembled, and my heart raced in my chest. I realized I had to escape this situation before things took a turn for the worse. "Do you want me to call someone for you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, but inside I was bracing myself for the worst. The man's gaze remained fixed on me. He didn't respond, only silently approached me, each heavy step echoing in the quiet space. With only the sound of the howling wind and the rain pounding against the window outside, I could feel my breaths becoming more rapid. The air in the house suddenly felt suffocating, as if shrouded in an invisible darkness. My heart started racing as I stealthily reached for the phone sitting on the table, just a few steps away. But just as I was about to touch the phone, a cold hand suddenly rested on my shoulder. I jumped and turned around to find the strange man standing right in front of me with his vacant eyes. His breath chilled the air, carrying with it an unnameable fear. "You don't need to call anyone," he whispered, his voice low yet menacing, as if my life was in his hands. "I'm just here to wait." Each of his words made me feel like the blood in my veins was freezing. "Wait," I stammered, trying to understand what he was implying. But his gaze, that smirk, everything radiated an unmistakable threat. I struggled to stay calm, though inside I wanted to scream and run away immediately. "I think you should leave right now," I said, trying to sound firm, but my voice felt weaker and more trembling than I wanted. The man did not back down. Instead, he slowly lowered his head, looking at me with his deep-set eyes, and flashed a haunting smile, as if he held the entire situation in his hands. My heart raced in my chest, and I realized I was being pushed into a dangerous corner. Everything around me seemed to spin. I had to do something, immediately. I felt my entire body freeze at the man's eerie smile. For a moment, I realized I had no other choice. If I didn't act right now, everything could end worse than I imagined. My breath quickened, and I decided that running away was the only option. Without thinking further, I pushed the man back with all my strength. He staggered, and I seized this opportunity to dash straight toward the front door. The sound of the rain and wind outside seemed to blend with the pounding of my heart. I could hear his heavy footsteps chasing behind me, the thuds of his shoes on the floor echoing like hammers striking the ground. I didn't dare look back. I could only charge forward, my trembling hand reaching for the doorknob. As soon as I opened the door, a cold wind gusted into the house, bringing a chilling breath that penetrated to the bone. The rain poured relentlessly, as if the entire world was drowning in nature's fury. There was no time to think. I burst outside, my feet sinking into the slippery mud of the path. The storm outside was even worse than I had imagined. The wind howled so fiercely that I had to lean into it to avoid being swept away. Rain lashed against my face like a whip, blurring my vision. But I couldn't stop, couldn't turn back to the house that had become a death trap. The sound of the man's footsteps behind me continued, emphasizing that he was still right on my tail. I dashed across the front yard, my legs unsteady as I slipped in the mud. Fear surged in my chest, but I couldn't let it take over. I had to run. I had to escape. My eyes fixed on the car parked a few meters away. That was my only chance. I charged toward it, feeling each icy drop of water seep through my clothes, but I didn't care. My trembling hand fumbled through my jacket pockets for the keys. When I opened the car door and jumped inside, the man was right behind me, just a few steps away. I slammed the door shut, my shaking hands inserting the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed my foot on the gas, speeding away from the muddy path. Through the rearview mirror, I saw the silhouette of the man standing there, motionless in the pouring rain, his cold eyes watching me until the car disappeared from sight. I didn't know how far I had driven. All I knew was that I had escaped, but the heavy feeling still weighed on my heart. The stranger, his horrifying smile, the sound of his footsteps chasing me through the storm, all of it would haunt me forever. Since that terrifying night, my life changed forever. Even after leaving that house, which had once been a sanctuary in the suburbs, I couldn't shake off the sense of being haunted. The image of the man with his soulless eyes, his creepy grin, and the footsteps pursuing me through the storm remained vivid in my mind. Even in the daylight, the slightest noise or a gust of wind outside the window would make me jump, my heart racing as if he was standing right behind me. Every stormy night, I found myself engulfed in a living nightmare. The sound of rain pattering on the roof, the rumbling thunder sent chills down my spine. I always felt like something was lurking outside, waiting for the moment to appear, just like that night. In the darkness, I thought I could hear a slow, deliberate knock on the door, each thud like a haunting melody, and his deep voice echoing, "I know you're in there." That feeling of fear was not fleeting. It was a deep-rooted anxiety that had taken hold of me. There were nights I would wake up drenched in cold sweat, gasping for breath as the dreams of those soulless eyes and that deathly smile returned. Those nightmares seemed endless. Every time I thought I was escaping, he would reappear, silent and menacing. Even though the police found nothing at the house, and everyone tried to reassure me that it was just a stranger, deep down, I knew it was not that simple. My fear was not merely of a man showing up unexpectedly in the stormy night. It was a fear of something inexplicable, an eerie presence that had invaded my life and might never go away. No matter how hard I tried to forget, the haunting memories of that night continued to pursue me. It became a part of me, like a mental scar that would never heal. I always wondered, would he come back? Would one night, when the next storm rolled in, I hear that knocking again? Every time the sky darkens and the wind begins to howl, fear washes over me like a rolling wave. I often sit by the window, my gaze fixed on the pouring rain, waiting for a familiar figure to appear. I've tried to find safety in my daily routines, locking the doors, drawing the curtains tightly, but even in the most peaceful dreams, that shadow always follows me. One night, during a relentless storm, I heard a gentle, firm knock at the door, familiar yet unsettling. My heart jumped in my chest. It's just the wind, I told myself, but a part of me acknowledged the opposite. I knew that presence could not be erased, that the fear had become a part of me, inseparable. When the knock came a second time, I could no longer sit still. My breath quickened, each beat of my heart pounding like a drum. I stood up and reached for the doorknob, but a shiver ran down my spine. In the end, I decided to open the door. I had no other choice. If he was really standing there, I would have to face the truth. The door swung open, but there was no one there. Only the cold air of the storm rushed in, the howling wind mingling with the rain like the cries of a lost soul. But I knew he was somewhere, lurking in the shadows. The fear did not diminish. It merely transformed into suspicion, making me wonder, is he watching me? As I returned to the living room, the darkness seemed denser, enveloping every corner of the house. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from hidden places. I decided to turn on the lights brighter. The strong illumination helped dispel the darkness and my doubts. I sat back by the window, my gaze focused on the curtain of rain outside. The droplets rolled down the glass, creating distorted images of the world beyond. But in that moment, I realized that fear could not hold my life captive forever. I would not let that stranger, or anything else, steal the peace I deserved. When the storm passes, I will rise, not just to survive, but to reclaim my life. I will no longer run from fear. I will learn to face it. Even though his presence still haunts me, I will find a way to overcome it and restore peace to my soul. Today may be a dark day, but tomorrow will shine again. In the end, I decided I had to confront this fear. I armed myself with a flashlight, grabbed my phone, and headed for the front door. When the knock echoed again, this time I did not back down. I opened the door, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. But in front of me was not the figure of the strange man, but an endless void, filled only with the howling wind and the rain pounding against the ground. The fear within me did not vanish, but at least I had faced it. I had dared to open the door. I vowed that no matter what happened, I would not let fear control my life anymore. Perhaps the ghost of that night would always haunt me, but I would not allow it to turn me into a prisoner in my own home. And if one day he returns, I will stand firm, no longer trembling, and confront whatever awaits me.